Small and light, it radically changed the face of modern fighters. The General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon was a technical breakthrough of its time, and indeed it hasn't lost its relevance for more than 47 years. Initially designed to be a lightweight day fighter, now it can use almost any type of weapon regardless of the time of day and weather. The F-16 was built to be relatively inexpensive and easy to maintain compared to earlier generations of fighter aircrafts. All its technical solutions were focused on high maneuverability without major power losses. Being highly agile, the F-16 was the first American fighter specially designed both to pull 9G maneuvers and to reach maximum speed of over Mach 2. All this made it the most numerous fourth-generation fighter jet. More than 4,600 airplanes have been constructed since production approval. Now it's hard to imagine, but it might have never been built. It was even shelved for a while. The concept of the plane had to face strong opposition and overcome stiff competition. It was due to a will of one man who truly believed in this design that the F-16 project did take place. So, let's go deep into this topic. In 1963, the US Air Force started the Project Forecast, a study that was meant to identify the future weapons trends. Considering that by 1960s, a great variety of missiles was applied in the armed forces, it suggested that future air combat would be carried out primarily by long-range missile fire. The new generations of fighters were to abandon classic designs in favor of higher speed and longer range. Equipped with extremely large radar systems, they could detect enemy fighters at beyond visual range. This turned them into heavier, more technologically sophisticated and costlier machines that looked more like interceptors. The US Navy had long ago come to similar conclusions. The great example of this theory would be the Douglas F-6D Missileer, a long-endurance but slow and unmaneuverable design equipped with very powerful missiles and radar for fleet defense. The US Air Force had already used similar designs for interceptors, where the large size of its targets allowed reasonable radar performance. As radar equipment improved, fighters gained similar range performance against much smaller targets. Both the Air Force and Navy expected to use the General Dynamics 111 Aardvark and McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II for their long and medium-range needs. Considering the dogfighting days were over, no internal guns were installed in the Phantom. However, real-world experience in the Vietnam War was somehow different. Early generation Soviet jet fighters proved to be more of a challenge than expected. The 13-to-1 kill-to-loss ratios achieved in Korea were sometimes only 2-to-1 in Vietnam. Furthermore, the rules of engagement in Vietnam precluded long-range missile attacks in most instances, as visual identification was no more required. The combat invariably closed to short ranges. Under these conditions, tiny MiG-21 and MiG-17 were less noticeable targets comparing to the main American fighter, the F-4 Phantom II, which was a large machine. Moreover, the enemy aircrafts were often too close to fire a missile. And as we know, the first generation of Phantoms was not equipped with machine guns. Although the F-4 was designed for maximum 7G overload, which was a great value at that time, the aircraft lost speed very quickly, making sharp turns, which left no opportunity to make unexpected and sudden maneuvers. That had been compounded by poor side, down and back visibility. Under these conditions, maneuverability and short-range air-to-air weapons became critical. Besides, American jets' sophisticated technologies were expensive and required lots of maintenance. Considering the great variety of airplanes used by the Air Force at that time, it could become unsustainable for the economy. The unification was the only way to make maintenance cheaper. In the early 1960s, another theory completely different to the Project Forecast appeared. Based on his experiences in the Korean War and as a fighter tactics instructor, Colonel John Boyd and mathematician Thomas Christie developed the energy maneuverability, or the EM theory. According to it, the value of aircraft-specific energy maintenance was the advantage in fighter combat. Maneuverability was the means of getting inside an adversary's decision-making cycle. Boyd called this process the OD loop, which stands for Observation, Orientation, Decision, Action. This approach claimed that new fighters should be capable of quick changes in speed, altitude and direction. A jet that was superior in its ability to gain or lose energy while outturning an opponent could initiate and control any engagement opportunity. Fast transient capability allowed the pilot to stay inside a hard-turning opponent when on the offensive and to force an overshoot of an opponent when on the defensive. These parameters called for a small, lightweight aircraft which could minimize drag and increase the thrust-to-weight ratio. In 1965, the US Air Force initiated two concept development studies, the Fighter Experimental, or the FX, and Advanced Day Fighter, the ADF. The FX project envisioned a large, heavy twin-engine aircraft, while the ADF was to develop a highly maneuverable, lightweight design which would outperform the MiG-21 by 25%. The main problem about FX design was its high cost. The aircraft would be too expensive to consider equipping the entire Air Force. This was the main reason to create less expensive ADF. Their combination was aimed to solve the unification issue. However, the theory was to face a reality. In July 1967, the Soviets presented the MiG-25. Mach 3 capable and highly maneuverable machine, it seemed a super fighter capable to outrun anything presented in the US. Furthermore, Soviet propaganda emphasized every new record set by MiG-25. It was a real shock. The US had to post something. Therefore, all the resources were concentrated on the FX program, and the ADF was totally abandoned. As a result, the F-15 Eagle was developed. It managed to restore parity in the sky. When on September 6, 1976, Soviet pilot Viktor Belenko hijacked MiG-25 and landed it in Japan, the US Air Force officials were able to see that F-15 was superior to it. This made the Air Force's FX proponents very hostile to any other concept that could be a threat to the F-15 program. Boyd, however, was unimpressed with the resulting weight growth in the F-15 and the shelving of the ADF. To reanimate the ADF project, he gathered a group of like-minded innovators, known as the Fighter Mafia. The nickname was a professional jest coined by an Air Force member, Everest Riccioni. It was a rejoinder to the Bomber Mafia, theorists at the Air Corps Tactical School in the 1930s, whose ideas led to the primacy of heavier bomber aircraft performing strategic bombing over that of fighter. The group united Air Force officers and civilian defense analysts who were in opposition to fighter design criteria at that time. One of their main claims was that beyond visual range combat was a fantasy. According to them, design focused on high technology and planes that could go higher, faster and farther, increased costs and decreased effectiveness. The group's view was that cheaper designs would have been much more effective. The Fighter Mafia also advocated the use of John Boyd and Thomas Christie EM theory in designing fighter aircraft. The EM model enabled quantitative comparison of the performance of aircraft in terms of air combat maneuvering in the context of dogfighting. The Fighter Mafia influenced the specifications for the FX and went on independently develop specifications for the lightweight day fighter. Both the FX proponents and the Fighter Mafia kept criticizing each other. The truth, however, was somewhere in the middle. The next generation of warplanes combined both maneuverability, which the Fighter Mafia supported, as well as large active radars and radar-guided missiles advocated by the FX proponents. In 1969, the Fighter Mafia was able to secure Department of Defense funding for General Dynamics and Northrop to study design concepts based on the EM theory. General Dynamics received $49,000 and Northrop received $100,000 study contracts to design concepts that embodied the theory: a small, low-drag, low-weight, pure fighter with no bomb racks. The ADF concept, revamped and renamed as the FXX, gained civilian political support under the reform-minded Deputy Secretary of Defense David Packard, who favored the idea of competitive prototyping. As a result, in May 1971, the Air Force Prototype Study Group was established, and Boeing became its key member. In 1972, 5 manufacturers – Boeing, General Dynamics, Lockheed, Northrop, and Watt – submitted proposals. The Watt V1100 and the Lockheed CL1200 two-Lancer were eliminated. The Boeing model 908-909 was initially most favored. It was quite similar in technology and appearance to General Dynamics model 401-16B, but costlier. Finally, the Air Staff selected General Dynamics model 401 and Northrop's P600. GD and Northrop were awarded contracts worth $37.9 million and $39.8 million to produce YF-16 and YF-17 respectively, with the first flights of both prototypes planned for early 1974. The first YF-16 had its official maiden flight on the 2nd of February 1974. Its actual first flight happened by accident during a high-speed taxi test on the 20th of January 1974. While gathering speed, its stabilators scraped the ground and the aircraft then began to veer off the runway. The test pilot, Phil Oestricher, decided to lift off to avoid a potential crash, safely landing 6 minutes later. The slight damage was quickly repaired. Considering high competitiveness, General Dynamics tried to avoid mentioning the above fact. They insisted that the first flight occurred on time. The LWF proponents successfully advocated the idea of complementary fighters in high-cost, low-cost force mix. The mix acceptance defined relationships between the LWF and the F-15. It slightly softened the confrontation of two programs. As the LWF opposition in the Air Force was still strong, the production plan was regarded hypothetically, with no firm plans to procure the winner. However, LWF program was suddenly supported on the other side of Atlantic. This was one of the factors that turned the LWF into a serious acquisition program. Being NATO members, Belgium, Denmark, the Netherlands and Norway were looking forward for a new generation fighter bomber that could replace their 104G variants of the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter Interceptor. Moreover, their goal was to manufacture the aircraft under license, same as the F-104G. In early 1974, they reached an agreement with the US that if the US Air Force placed orders for the aircraft winning the LWF fly-off, they would consider ordering it as well. The US Air Force also needed to replace its F-4 and Republic F-105 Thunder Chief fighter bombers. In April 1974, the LWF program was redirected to a multi-role fighter design in a new Air Combat Fighter competition, or the ACF. The ACF was no longer pure fighter, but more a fighter bomber, which essentially ended opposition from the FX group. At the same time, the US Congress was seeking to achieve greater commonality in fighter procurements by the Air Force and Navy. They actually wanted a navalized variant of the ACF. As the ACF program became international, European competitors joined GD and Northrop. These were Dassault Breguet Mirage F1M53, CP-CAT Jaguar, and the Saab 37E Eurofighter. This significantly raised the stakes, turning the ACF into a so-called the arms deal of the century. The US Air Force confirmed firm plans to place an order for the winning ACF design sufficient to equip 5 tactical fighter wings. The flight tests showed that the YF-16 had superior acceleration, climb rates, endurance and turn rates. Another advantage of the YF-16 was that it employed the Pratt & Whitney F100 turbofan engine, which was the same power plant used by the F-15. Such commonality would lower the unit costs of engines for both programs. On the 13th of January 1975, the YF-16 had been selected as a winner of the ACF competition. On the 7th of June 1975, the four European partners, now known as European Participation Group, signed up for 348 aircraft at the Paris Air Show. Two European production lines, one in the Netherlands at Focus Schiphol-Oost facility and the other at Sapkas Gosselies plant in Belgium, would produce 184 and 164 units respectively. Norway's Kongsberg Våpenfabrik and Denmark's Therma AS also manufactured parts and sub-assembles for the aircraft. In January 1979, the F-16 entered the US Air Force operational. In the same month, the Belgian Air Force also received the first aircraft, making the F-16 the first warplane produced simultaneously for the US and foreign air forces. The F-16 was given its name of Fighting Falcon on the 21st of July 1980. Its pilots and crews often used the name Viper instead, because of a perceived resemblance to a viper snake, as well as to a fictional Colonial Viper starfighter from the television program Battlestar Galactica, which was aired at the time the F-16 entered service. However, the YF-17 was not shelved either. The Navy wanted a twin-engine fighter, and selected the YF-17 as the basis for what would become the McDonnell Douglas FA-18 Hornet. The F-16 was much smaller and lighter than its predecessors. Initially, the plane had two production models, the single-seaters F-16A and the two-seaters F-16B. It was a single-engine machine equipped with Pratt & Whitney F100 PW200 afterburning turbofan engine and a thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1, providing power to climb and vertical acceleration. It was armed with an internal M61 Vulcan cannon in the left wing root and had multiple locations for mounting various missiles and bombs. Innovations also included a frameless bubble canopy for better visibility and a reclined seat to reduce G-force effects on the pilot. The F-16 used advanced aerodynamics and avionics, including the first use of a relaxed static stability together with fly-by-wire flight control system. Therefore, less stable design had faster response to control inputs, so the aircraft required smaller control deflections to initiate maneuvering. Since these specs made full pilot control difficult or even impossible, an artificial stability was imposed using computers, servers and sensors as part of fly-by-wire control system. Fly-by-wire system replaced the conventional manual flight controls of the F-16 with fully electronic interface. At first, the system received a great deal of criticism based on fear of program errors, but this threat had never been proven. Side-mounted control stick allowed the pilot to perform faster movements. Since it had no mechanical communication with the control surfaces, a mechanism which provided the feedback in the form of counteraction was equipped. It helped the pilot to feel the forces acting on the airplane parts. Another mechanism provided control stick with a small backlash, so it felt more natural for the pilot. The computer performed thousands of calculations and corrections per second, allowing the pilot to focus on the current task and preventing him from performing flight maneuvers potentially dangerous for the aircraft. The pilots often jested that the pilot was not operating the F-16, but the F-16 was operating the pilot. The operators have won 71 confirmed air victories on the plane, and who knows, we might be surprised by the F-16 in future.